this chat, or the first part of it anyway, will be a discussion of some issues that are unique to the left hand and the left arm as we play the cello. And after that, I hope to get to as many of your questions as possible about that or any other topic. I'm sure there's something that I will forget, but I'm hoping to cover as much information as possible in a short time. So here we go. Let's start by sort of acknowledging truth, which is that in order for each of us to find what works best and to understand our own individual physical and technical relationship to the cello more clearly, we need to explore for ourselves. We need to consider alternatives. We need to investigate options. We need to ask questions of ourselves or maybe of others. And then ultimately we give ourselves possibilities, right? So with options, then we can make whatever choices we make technically for conscious reasons and reasons that are valid to us. Not just because somebody else did it or we saw someone else do it, or even because somebody else told us to do it. Now, teachers, of course, are incredibly valuable assets to all of us, but I hope you agree that once each of us progresses to a certain point as an instrumentalist, it's also kind of imperative that we have our own curiosity in order to fully understand the concepts that we've been given and even dare to explore further and refine our technique and basically to understand why one solution for us is more successful than another one. So what I'm hoping to avoid in this chat is actually just telling you my ways of doing things, although some of those should become obvious as we go along. But I don't want to be just one more person's opinion. I don't want to be just another system of dogma or whatever for vibrato or spiccato or something else to add to all of the other systems or rules that are probably already in your head. What I thought would be most valuable with this time is to take a little bit more objective and exploratory approach, looking at the process by which we can make technical decisions as much as the result. And I think we can all get closer to making good technical decisions for ourselves by acknowledging a few underlying principles that hopefully are not controversial to anyone. Hopefully all of us can agree that certain things are desirable in playing. What might a few of those be? One, I would say, is naturalness, meaning let's learn from how we already use our body ergonomically in real life away from the cello and ask ourselves how much of that can apply to our playing. Another concept that probably is non-controversial is simplicity, meaning let's find ways to organize our technique that are broadly useful across as much of our playing as possible. Gives sort of a sense of unity to our approach and the feeling that our playing is not a collection of 50 or dozens of individual habits. Those habits sort of coalesce into one feeling of playing. And maybe another broadly acceptable concept that's desirable is let's agree that we want to avoid any sustained or unreleased tension in the body. So there might be more, but those are three very important ones upon which maybe some of our other decisions can be based. So since our topic today is the left hand and arm, issues that we want to consider immediately fall into two categories: those that apply within a given position on the cello and those that arise when we move between positions on the cello. So let's start with talking about what the hand can do within a position on the instrument. Starting with something that may actually seem relatively simple or rudimentary to everybody, but it happens all the time when we play, which is, what is the ideal way to place our fingers on the string? What is the easiest, most natural way? So you don't even have to have a cello to do this with me, but this motion, which is very, very natural to us, we could do it on a table or any flat surface, even on our leg or anything. We can go up in the hand, we can go down. Super natural. And I mean, it is super natural. What I'm doing is dropping the fingers from above. So try something else with me now. Let's try dropping the fingers or moving the fingers from above, but moving them down very slowly. Probably what you can feel is that we can do that, but that takes a lot more energy than just letting them drop. Let's also drop them down and hold them there. Sort of white knuckle it a little bit on the cello. Hopefully we can all feel that that involves an incredible amount of sustained tension that is unnecessary. Just dropping the fingers in the way we naturally do, each finger kind of creates a ping, and then there's a release. So on the string, can we apply that? Can we just drop the fingers from above? Turns out, yes, we can. I have a choice of dropping and holding tight, and I also have that same choice of placing the finger very lightly. Neither of those feel as good to me as just dropping from above. How high is necessary to drop? I don't know. Maybe this is something we all find for ourselves, right? If I drop from too low, it doesn't feel like the finger actually is as free. If I drop from too high, it just feels like it's unnecessary motion. So for all of us, I think it's interesting to experiment with the action by which we put the fingers on the string. For me, finding the ideal ping for each finger creates a clear articulation. It releases the previous finger, if we allow it to. And if we do it well, it releases tension in the hand, if it's there. As an experiment, try dropping a finger and holding it perfectly still. Now try dropping the finger and just relaxing the hand afterwards, and we'll see that there's a little bit of excess motion there. It's actually harder to drop a finger, even a good drop, and keep it perfectly still. So relaxed hand feels better in this case too, and this has implications for vibrato, which we will talk about a bit later. Do we want to change the way we put the fingers on the string for soft playing or slow playing? Let's experiment. I'm going to turn original sound on. Sometimes cellists, I think, when music gets slow and soft, our physical motions to put the finger on the string change. We might move the fingers more slowly. We might place them a little more cautiously somehow, a little more carefully. For me, I don't know if you can hear the difference, but dropping the fingers with the ping, the ideal drop that we just talked about, is actually beautiful for slow playing because it creates the same clear articulation and same looseness in the hand. That articulation feels a little bit dead and sounds a little bit dead. So let's search for the ideal way to put our fingers on the string, first and foremost. What are other choices that we have with our fingers? Well, another one is what part of the finger do we use to contact the string? If we take a particular note in isolation, that's deep on the pad of the finger. If I move over toward the tip of the finger, I don't know if that's a difference you can hear, but try it yourself. In real life, those differences make a difference in the sound. And the sound is warmer and deeper using the pad of the finger. So maybe for certain types of playing, we would want that. One other experiment to do, I think, let's do this together. Keep your fingers relatively flat and let's sort of, try to be independent. Pretend you're playing a quick scale. Now, come up toward the fingertips, and I think what you'll feel is that there's a great amount of freedom that comes into the hand as we get closer to the fingertips. So, again, perhaps our choice might be that in fast playing, slightly closer to the fingertip produces, in whatever area of the cello, more physical freedom than playing sort of flat-fingered like this. But warm sound comes from something slightly more toward the pad. So it might be possible to get the best of both worlds, again, depending on the situation that we're in musically. One thing that I think most of you will remember, if you're cellists, let's talk about another aspect of this now, is when we're beginners, sometimes I remember being taught C is for cello. And this implies a few things. It implies that the hand is relatively square. It implies that the thumb is under the second finger. And it kind of implies that we cover all the notes in whatever position, even if we're not playing them. Now, hold that position in the air. To some of you, this might feel good. If you're anything like me, this feels horrible. So hold this position, and now relax your hand gradually. And I think if we gradually relax our hand, two things happen to me. One is my fingers get closer together. They definitely don't hold themselves in this tense position. And my thumb comes much closer to this end of the hand, which of course is where it naturally lives. Now, if we have a completely relaxed hand and we turn it around like this, you probably immediately recognize that this is extremely close to the left hand of a violinist or a violist. So the question is, which aspects of that might be applicable or advantageous in cello technique? Let's find out. Certainly holding notes that keeps the hand tense, let's agree that that's probably not a great thing. Let me turn original sound off again. I think what we can also see is that even if the thumb at some point has a home behind second finger, once we progress to a certain point, the thumb needs to be to provide support for the left hand, but also be mobile, right? So as an exercise, we don't have to do this in real life, but imagine that you are going to hold each of your 4 fingers in first position for 5 minutes. If I was going to hold first finger for 5 minutes, my thumb would find the position which is most natural and feels the best. If I move up the hand a little bit, third finger, eventually fourth finger, if I knew I was going to hold this note for 5 minutes, my hand would definitely change. The position of my thumb would change. My hand would rotate this way, not this way, but this way to support the fourth finger. And my thumb needs to be ready to go along if the hand requires that. So for me, left hand balance for fourth finger looks like this. For first finger, it looks quite different. So we can only gain, I think, from exploring what it means to find the ideal balance on each finger of the hand. But one of the most important things that we notice from this is that the thumb needs to be able to move. Of course, the thumb is a point of support and organization for the hand and a counterbalance in a way. But if it's fixed behind part of the hand, probably we're going to be fighting something. So one other super important thing, we can't discuss the thumb, the role of the thumb in the left hand, without considering one of the most important and under-discussed aspects of the left hand, and that is the angle of the hand to the fingerboard. Many cello students are stuck between a variety of approaches, of a variety of angles, and don't even realize it. How do we consider the benefits or drawbacks of hand angle? Well, let's look at the options that we have. We can play with quite a square hand, or we can play with a hand that has a bit more angle to it. It is a universal truth, I think, in cello playing that everybody plays with an angled hand up high. So the question becomes, do I want to play with something down here that's quite different from up high? Or is there some benefit, possibly, for having a unified angle up and down the fingerboard? If you like the idea of experimenting with keeping your angle up and down the fingerboard, just note that in order for the hand to become more angled in lower positions, the thumb absolutely needs to find a home that is probably going to be different than with a square hand. I've seen lots of younger cellists play with an angled hand, but with their thumb still out towards this side of the neck. And what that does is push the arm up, usually, and yeah, just create a situation where the fingers are trying to be angled, but the thumb is actually sending the hand that way. So let's accept that obviously we're not aiming for violin and viola hand on the cello, but they play with an angled hand and they don't generally have tension in their thumb. So maybe the ideal left hand, angled left hand on the cello involves the thumb moving this way a little bit. So I would encourage all of you to experiment with this. It's not talked about nearly often enough. But if we like the idea of simplicity, maybe getting toward one angle on the fingerboard that we can use up and down the cello is a good thing. Extensions, which can create tension in the hand. This is another area where, depending on the angle that we have, the motion to extend is completely different, right? If our hand is square on the cello, the extension motion is actually kind of opening the hand this way. Try, those of you, next time you have your cellos, try that. For those of us who play with an angled hand, the extension motion actually looks a little bit more like stepping up and over the previous finger, right? Square, it's like this. Angle, it's more like this. So again, not saying one is right or wrong, just saying our extension motion is affected by that, or can be. Lots of cellists who play with angled hands extend by temporarily squaring their hand, which may or may not be ideal if you give yourself the choice of extending this way and keeping your hand similar. So as you're watching yourselves play, just be aware of your left hand angle. And if you find sometimes it's square, sometimes it's angled, maybe there's a greater unity that can be found there. But to me, this is an incredibly important aspect of left hand organization, angle and the way that the thumb is affected by that. In half position, it's not our favorite position on the cello. This is another area where if we extend backwards, it's possible to hold tension in the hand. Pieces that lie in keys like E flat or C minor, particularly susceptible to this. So the question is, do we extend backward and keep the tension and sort of live in this position, or is there some value, even if it's quick, in releasing the hand and coming back all the way, fully embracing what half position means? Say maybe experiment with that as well. Let's talk just briefly about vibrato motions, just mainly to establish some truths, and then maybe you can explore them as you wish. But hand angle affects vibrato. If we play with a square hand, the vibrato motion tends toward the rocking motion, which is similar to turning a doorknob, rotating on the finger this way. Different people feel this being initiated in different places in the arm, but it is that. The closer we come to an angled hand, one that's more similar to a violin and viola, the more the vibrato motion becomes a vertical pumping motion, which doesn't have to involve rotating the hand this way, right? So turn this on. This is a motion that is this way. I feel it in the forearm first and foremost, and then it sort of exploits the natural flexibility in the last knuckle of the hand. It should look familiar to anyone who's watched violinists and violists play. So again, being clear about your hand angle, especially down in the low positions of the cello, will have implications for vibrato. Can we combine vibrato motions? Yes. If we have an angled hand vibrato, we can let our wrist rock if we want extra rich vibrato. However, playing with a square hand, the pumping motion actually doesn't work so well. So those that play with a very square hand get the wide, the range of their vibratos basically from one motion, which is a sort of derived from the doorknob motion. So again, just being clear about these things is the idea. And then through that you can experiment and find what's right for you. Let's talk about a few issues to consider that have to do with moving between positions on the cello. And in order to do that, like before, let's first look at some motions without the cello. Do this with me if you can. Let's just take our left arm and move it sort of laterally through the air. Make a straight line and then stop it at some point in front of you. And now what I want you to do is do the same thing, but make a slight rainbow, a shallow rainbow, in order to get to the same place. So you sort of land slightly diagonally from above out in front of you versus just this. I hope what you feel is that the straight line takes a lot more tension to arrive, and it doesn't feel quite as natural as something that has a curve to it. Now, I think physical therapists could probably tell us why this is, but arcs, curves, spirals, parts of circles, the body tends to like these things better than right angles and straight lines. So if we can introduce that concept into various aspects of our playing, I think we're going to be getting closer to fluid ergonomic motions. So obviously this is sort of an approximation of what a shift might feel like. So shifting just laterally probably won't feel as good as a shift that has an arc-like quality to it. Where in the arm do we feel upward and downward shifts? This is worth practicing without the cello as well. If I'm going to just imagine an upward shift, this might be different for all of us, but what I hope you feel is that it's somewhere up here. You might feel it in your shoulder blade first. You might feel it, meaning in the back. You might feel it here. You might feel it far up the upper arm. But hopefully what we can feel is that it's not initiated below the elbow, right? Something further up the arm initiates it. For me, it feels kind of square, and the shoulder moves and then the arm moves. What about a downward shift? So put our arm out here, and let's imagine we're making a downward shift on the cello like this. Where in the arm does that initiate? For me, it's not quite as high. So an upward shift and a downward shift are not just the reverse of one another. For me, a downward shift feels like it's, the back of my forearm begins to move back and the arm follows. So that can be a useful motion to practice and clarify for yourself. But in both cases, what's implied and necessary is that shifts are not, this is a trap that we fall into sometimes, all of us do, which is sending a finger to play a note, or having a shift that's initiated in the hand, or where the arm and the hand move at the same time. Just one more reminder that shifts that are prepared out here are always going to be a better result than something that's tight and quick and lower in the arm. let's talk for a minute about timing of shifts. This is something that I think is also under discussed. If what we've been practicing, if we move our hand through the air, I think what we've noticed also is that if the arm moves, the hand will move pretty quickly afterwards, right? The arm doesn't move and then the hand stays behind, right? But also the hand doesn't move and lead the arm. If the arm moves, the hand will move. So on the cello, you can practice this. Pick two notes. I'm picking C to F. You can see kind of the physical rhythm of the arm and then the hand, right? So I can make a conscious choice to slow this down slightly, or probably to speed it up slightly. But these are all variations of a very natural physical thing. And the point that I'd like to make is that the more familiar we are with the physical timing of the arm and then the hand in a shift, the better our shifting is going to be, right? And this has nothing to do with musical timing. This is the important point, right? Sometimes it works out in music that we get ready and prepare a shift exactly on the previous beat in the music. It's rare, though. Most of the time, the initiation of our shifting motion doesn't fall very neatly with whatever tempo or pulse of the music that we're playing. So recognize that those are two different things. Practice this loose physical rhythm, different from musical rhythm. And I think what you'll find is we can avoid problems in shifting, which usually manifest as problems in intonation, because the timing of the shifts is not ideal. We can gain greater control over that, and what we can usually do is stay on the note before a shift longer, and then trust that we can move a long distance on the cello very quickly if we are loose. So I find in teaching more often people get themselves into trouble by preparing too soon, and then the hand is ready to move, or the hand is already on the note that you're going, but musically it's not time to be there yet. So let's recognize musical rhythm and physical ergonomic rhythm are two different things, and practice them independently. One other thing about shifting that's worth noting, there are two basic shifting motions that we use on the cello. Different teachers seem to talk about them different ways: old finger, new finger, rainbow, smiley face. I think if what I'm saying is unclear to you and you have a teacher, maybe ask your teacher to clarify that. But I hope that's clear to most everyone. By old finger, what we mean is that we shift on the previous finger. And when we're in the new position, we ping and drop the new finger down. A new finger shift would be the kind that I was just executing on the A string. Let's say I'm going from 3 to 2. The shift is essentially on the second finger, which is the new finger. It slides underneath 3 and scoops the old finger out of the way. So the important thing to realize from an ergonomics perspective is that these shifts are both motions that are prepared from the arm, but they feel quite different in the hand. This feels more like this, whereas still prepared, but it feels a little more like a playground slide, going out like this. So the reason to consider the difference between these two is to consider which fingerings are ideal for which of the shifting types. So obviously old finger works best to a higher finger in the hand. 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 4. Most cellists, that's quite clear. What is less clear is that from an ergonomics perspective, if we give ourselves the choice, I think most of us can agree that new finger shifts feel best to the same or a lower finger in the hand. 4-4, 3-3, 2-2, 4-3, 4-2, 4-1, 3-2, 3-1. Any of those things will feel better than executing a new finger shift to a higher finger in the hand. So what does that mean? Well, let's take quite an awkward shift on the cello. Let's say we're shifting from E up to B. And if I wanted to, most of the time we put 1 on E and we put 3 on B. So let's be careful that we don't get stuck with some type of audible expression that actually isn't ideal just because of our shifting motion. It is possible for me to play 1-3, but essentially what I'm doing is taking a fingering that would feel better with that type of shift and making it into this one. Sometimes it's impossible to avoid that, but what are the other options? Well, personally, I will often go out of my way to get on an ideal finger to leave from for a shift so that I could make that shift into 4-3, 3-3, 3-2, because the motion feels so much better, feels so much more natural than playing that particular shift 1-3. It's not that it can't be done, but if the theme of this monologue at this point is let's give ourselves choices and then choose the things that feel the best and work the best for us musically, that's always going to be a good thing. And let's remember too that when we are practicing these types of things, let's not be afraid of playing out of tune. I feel like sometimes even in our practice rooms, when nobody else is watching, we are still so mortified of missing a shift or playing out of tune that we end up just sort of practicing tense motions because we don't fully experiment with what it means to be free. So know that if you miss a shift and you miss it really, really long, that can actually be a great thing because it might mean that you released something or defrosted something that was frozen, that you were holding before. And so what we're doing now is controlling the musical result, but we're controlling it with a freedom in the body. And what we need to have the courage to do in our practice room is experiment with these things. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can squeeze in before we go to questions. This business of which shifts we make and which fingerings go with those types of shifts more naturally, if you allow it to, this will open, hopefully, some doors where your fingerings can become even more creative and serve you better. I'm just thinking of a very brief example of a shift that sometimes causes consternation, and it's a piece that hopefully most of us know, the A major Beethoven Sonata. Between the first two notes, what are the possibilities? Well, we can do, I think what most people do is start on 1, 2, 4. It's not a bad fingering. 1 to 2 sort of sets itself up for being an old finger shift. But say a player doesn't want that. Say a player wants something else, a smoother glide, like a new finger glide. Is 1 still the ideal finger to leave from? I don't know, but let's give ourselves the options, right? I can play 1 to 2. What are the other possibilities? What if I left from half position on 2? If I give myself that choice, personally, 2-2 feels better than 1-2 for the reason that we were just talking about. There are also, we have to consider that, 1-1-2. If we cross the fifth, do we cross it with the same finger, or do we 2-1? Is it more smooth that way? I don't know. The reason I say I don't know is because I don't know until I try. And then my own musical taste and sensibilities come in and allow me to feel great about the choice that I made, which is basically the overarching theme of this sermon or speech that I just gave. What I hope, in addition to covering some issues that maybe aren't talked about often enough in left-hand organization, just the idea, or giving all of you in the practice room license to own your own technique more. Of course, take the good ideas that were given to you by your teachers, other influences in your musical life, but I would say that ultimately we want those to be filtered through and therefore secondary to your own experience of what works the best for you.